Good morning, gentlemen. Wonderful weather, but it's not so wonderful in Ukraine. And I'm going to discuss what's happening in Ukraine now once again. Because now the battle has reached a very critical stage, and many must be wondering that it's all over, bar the shouting. But is it? Let's examine it. Now, 2 days back, there was a meeting of the High Command of the Russian Army and the Defense Ministry, presided over the Defense Minister. Vladimir Putin didn't attend. And along with the defense minister was the commander-in-chief of the Soviet Russian armed forces in Ukraine. And the decision was taken to withdraw from Kherson. Now, if you look at the map, you'll see that this city is right across the river Dnieper. And the Dnieper divides Ukraine into two. And at its narrowest, it's almost 3 miles wide. So if you've got to sustain an army across the river, you've got to have logistics support. Now, the bridges across the Ukraine have been destroyed. The Ukrainians have used their heavy artillery, long range artillery, and commissioned the bridges out of service. And the only way the Russians could supply their army across the river is through boats or a pontoon bridge, which is not enough to sustain a force of almost, say, 20 or 30,000 soldiers. So a decision was taken by the commander-in-chief of the Soviet army, Russian army, to withdraw across the river back. In other words, it means surrender, defeat. The Russians have accepted that they are going to withdraw a city which they had fought so hard to win just a few months back, and now they are going back. And the Ukrainians are cock a hoop, but at the same time, they are very, very circumspect. They are not going in straight away inside the city because they are feeling that maybe the Russians have booby trapped something, done something, and gone away. The Russian flag in the city has been removed by the Russians and taken away. A clear sign that the Russian army has said, hands up, as far as this portion of Ukraine is concerned. Now I've been wondering, and people are wondering, what really went wrong? How did the Ukrainians turn the tide? Actually, it's not very difficult to analyze because I've been repeatedly telling you all, as Field Marshal Montgomery has said, that the person who has to hold the ground is the infantry soldier. And the Russians were using a lot of rockets, drones, missile attacks, whatnot. They even had the kamikaze drones coming in from Iran. But to what use? You need the soldiers to hold the ground. And that is something the Russians were not able to produce. And now, as per my estimates, and generally, if I look at it, the Russians have lost about 1,500 tanks. These are authentic figures. That's number one. Number two, their casualties on the tune of 100,000. And if you take the ratio of 1:3, that means almost 30,000 soldiers have been killed. Now, that's a massive amount. The Indian army, fighting an insurgency and having fought 3 wars with Pakistan, with China, has not suffered 30,000 casualties during this entire period. 30,000 deaths. And if the Russians have suffered that much in a population of just 145 million, you can well imagine how hard pressed the Russians are. Loss of manpower, loss of the infantry soldier. And why the infantry soldier could hold the ground? Because he was not motivated. And faulty planning by Vladimir Putin. Well, one can look and suggest, but I've been telling all along that the Russians committed a big mistake when they went in only for a limited military engagement or operation in Ukraine. What did they mean by limited military operation? There's nothing like that. I've been repeatedly saying either it had to be a full scale war or no war. You don't have limited military engagement. And they have paid the price for it. They couldn't take Kiev. They haven't been able to take Kharkiv. They took Mariupol with great problem, with great trouble and casualties. They took Kherson with great problems, lots of casualties, and now they have withdrawn across the river Dnieper. Now, how did the Ukrainians do it? Firstly, the morale of the Ukrainians was very high. because they were fighting for their homeland. They felt Russia is an enemy. And they have the general people, that is, other than those of Russian origin, have always felt Russia to be an enemy. Ever since 1931-33, Stalin had induced a man-made famine in Ukraine. And what happened that time? 2 million people died of hunger. The Ukrainians haven't forgotten it. And though later on they integrated with the Soviet Union under Stalin, but probably that spark remained. And once the Soviet Union broke up, Ukraine went away. Though the Ukrainians and the Russians are the same people, but the Russians are discriminated, and Ukraine now is paying back in the same coin. Now, what is going to happen next? Lots of people are asking me, is the battle over? Because there are reports that Vladimir Putin is not in good health. He's having some problems. It could be a propaganda. It could be anything, but I'm not sure. But there seems to be a problem somewhere. And the second problem is that his leadership is suspect. As I said, Vladimir Putin is not a patch of the great leader Joseph Stalin, who led Russia during the Second World War against Hitler. In that time, when Stalin fought the war with Hitler, there was no holds barred, no quarter given, none expected. And in this case, Vladimir did the opposite. What did he do? He started a limited military engagement without using air power, without bombing Ukraine into submission, which he should have done in the first three weeks of the fighting, which he never did. And by that time, he should have known the Anglo Saxon powers are not going to let Russia off the hook. And historically, both the Americans and the Russians and the British have had a distaste for the Russians. They have a phobia of Russia, a dislike of Russia. Now, why should be though? I can't say, but that's a fact. And probably they wouldn't mind an accommodation with China, but with Russia they don't want an accommodation at all. And so they had given to Ukraine the latest weaponry, millions of dollars of weapons, including the HIMAR, radar guided artillery and missiles, and now the drones and the rockets are being intercepted by Ukraine with the weaponry given by the Americans. America is suffering, no doubt about it, and Ukraine is also suffering. If the Russians had got 30,000 killed, I'm very sure a similar number has been killed on the Ukrainian side also. But now they are avoiding casualties and they are fighting a different type of war. What are they doing? They are using the long range artillery and firing at the Russian positions incessantly. And the Russians have nothing to counter back other than use the aircraft or their own missiles, and they can't pinpoint the weapon, the place from where the firing is taking place. And that way, the casualties of the Ukrainians are reduced. But the war is not yet over. Now, as a student of military history and a man with some knowledge, I can tell you that if somebody thinks that he can start whistling, and it's all over, bother shouting, it's not like that. As you can see from the map, the Russians are going to withdraw across the Dnieper and regroup, and probably they will go in some other place in Ukraine and try to capture the area of the Donetsk region. Now, it's a touch point. What exactly has Vladimir Putin in mind? He's been fighting for over 7 months, and the results he has achieved are a big zero. In any other country, I think such a man would have been removed from power, but he's an elected representative, at least supposed to be an elected representative, and so he's just hanging on there. And most of his opponents, who oppose him, then they end up in jail. Now, what is going to happen next? The war is not going to be over. I was listening to one of the assessments by an air marshal of the Royal Air Force, and his view was that it's a tactical withdrawal from Kherson across the Dnieper, but Russians will group and come back. Now, I have a little bit of a different opinion. How long can the Russians continue like this? If they couldn't subdue Ukraine in 7 months, they won't be able to do it in the next 3, 4 months. And there's a good chance that Ukraine will recapture a lot of territory. If that happens, Russia would be in serious problem. And I'm told the Russian economy also is going down. They cannot sustain a war for months together with no result. The people are wondering what's happening. Vladimir Putin, what's going on? We're supposed to be the world's number one power. That's what the Russians have been told. And now we can't even beat Ukraine. Now, these are lessons which even China must be watching, because China is looking for an invasion of Taiwan. But probably the Chinese are very astute and they'll go about it in a different way. Not the way Putin went in, with limited engagement, no aim, nothing, just walk in like you're walking into a drawing room. Now you get bashed up and then you build up your forces, you start doing rockets and all that, but your army is not motivated, it can't fight, and that's the problem. He brought in so many generals, he changed command, but none of them has been able to deliver the goods, and that is a fact. The morale of the Russian army is low, and they have been losing tanks, armored carriers, personal carriers, field guns, and now they're pressing even the World War II tanks into service. Now, that's not going to be anything. The casualties are very high because the number of places they have brought in reservists to fight. And reservists, you see, they're retired, gone. I'm a reservist, and if somebody tells me to go back and start fighting, I mean, what is going to be my efficiency? So this is the point which we must bear in mind. Putin committed a blunder, didn't plan the invasion properly, took Ukraine lightly. The morale of the Russian army tanked because they didn't know why they were fighting. Ukraine has been fighting for their homeland. They've been aided by the Anglo-Saxon powers to a great extent. Ukraine, though destroyed, it is destroyed, won't recover for the next 40 years. But they have Uncle Sam, America, to pump in billions of dollars. And Russia will have nobody to help them. Gentlemen, the war is at an interesting stage, but I don't think it's over. And the Russians could still spring a surprise. But as the going is, it's about time Putin rethought his strategy. Maybe it would be a good idea to have a ceasefire and try to consolidate his gains. But then, there's no doubt, until Russia makes a decisive victory, the Russian prestige has gone down into the Arabian Sea. It is something like what happened to Pandit Nehru when he couldn't show his face in the world after the defeat with China in 1962. He thought he's a great third world leader, but the third world leader showed that he had legs of clay and he collapsed. So Putin also, for all the propaganda videos which used to see him riding a horse, he's doing judo, karate, and God knows what all, and now he's been shown that he's a man of clay as so, and he's going to have very difficult time to explain to his own people and to the world why the Russians could not defeat a small country like Ukraine. Well, wait for my next video. I'm keeping a watch on the situation. I have some friends there who are giving me a good feedback of what's happening. I'll come back to you later, more on this. In the meanwhile, I'll close now, gentlemen, and say, Jai Hind. Do subscribe to my video, share it with your friends, and God bless you all.